Hey guys, I wanted to do a quick demo of how you might do a portrait in watercolor. So the technique I'm going to show you is slightly different, as you can see from just normally painting a portrait in watercolor. There are a lot of techniques for portrait painting, but this one is my favorite because you can use only one color, ultramarine in this case, to really get any of the details of your image without having to, usually a portrait faces have so many different colors. So rather than getting so complicated in figuring out which color goes in the shadows, which color goes in the light spaces of the face, I like to use this method because, like I said, you use just one color, ultramarine, and then you're gonna add the skin tone on top of it. It doesn't matter what color or shade you are. The three colors for portraits, any color, is ultramarine, yellow ochre, and crimson. So those three colors, ultramarine, yellow ochre, and crimson. Those are the three colors that you need, and then eye colors and hair color and so forth. But anyway, so for this image, I did some random girl that I found in a magazine, and just a quick, this is called an underpainting. So I did an underpainting with ultramarine, and I started the hair just to, so that I can go on top of it with some darker values and show you how you might finish the hair. So in this first ultramarine underpainting, you are going to try to get all the lighter values, like here, and the darker values, and do any detail, like the detail in the ear, if the ear's in shadow. The only thing you're not going to touch are the teeth. And the eyes you don't need to worry about in ultramarine. You can do that in the regular eye color. So I did that, I let it dry nicely, and now what I'm gonna do is take my other two colors, yellow ochre and crimson, I'm gonna mix them together on my palette. And the color that I'm gonna make, I'll put it up here so you can see what it looks like, is like that, just like an orangey peach. So this is gonna be, she is a lighter skinned girl, so we'll water this down a little bit. And since all of my details are already here, I'm just gonna very gently paint over everything that I've done with this peachy skin color that she has. The lighting in my studio is very off right now because it's nighttime, so hopefully once this dries you'll be able to get a better sense of what her skin actually looks like. So what this ultramarine underpainting does is it is neutralized actually by the color that you're laying on top of it, or it will be, because you would do a few layers of skin tone. I'm gonna go over the ears too. And then we're gonna let that dry for a minute. Okay, so let's let that dry. She's already starting to come to life a little bit. Okay, hello little girl. She's kind of creepy with that one eye. Okay, so while that's drying, let's talk about the hair. So when you're doing hair or fur of an animal, you are going to, let me quickly just dab that. You're going to use at least three values. I like to use a light value. In this case, right now I left it white. This is my middle tone, and then I'm gonna have a dark. So I'm using just ivory black with a little bit of cadmium red in it. Okay, so I'm gonna I have a size 6 brush right now that's pointed at the end. It's a round brush, and I'm making a dark value. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start in an area where I know it's super dark, and then I'm gonna kind of flick my wrist up so that I'm creating some lines within my hair. And because the face is still wet, I'm gonna kind of paint slightly around the face. So there's gonna be a little bit of a halo in this painting. her hair is in like braids or something back there. I'm gonna clean my brush, and then I'm gonna gently kind of fade this. Okay, so I had a lot of water. I'm just gonna pull some of that paint back into the hair, into the darkness of the hair. So we have this light area, which I'm just gonna take I'm taking clean water, and what I'm doing is I'm pulling a little bit of that color that I just laid down into the light area, into where the part of her hair is gonna be. And then I can take my almost completely dry brush, and if there are any chances to lift any highlights, I'm gonna do that here, any high highlights. Almost white. All right, so I'm gonna go on the side with the same concept. So I'm gonna do the lighter value, and then I'm gonna kind of fill in the rest of it with this middle value, leaving the light areas alone. Painting over where the dark areas are going to be. I would let that dry, and then we do the same thing that we did there. So you can obviously go in and add more detail if you want some darker values. That's totally fine. But for now, that's all I'm going to do. Now let's go back to the face. I think it has dried enough for me to do a second layer. So on this girl's cheek, she has some pink cheeks. So I'm gonna take my crimson. So I'm still only using those 3 colors. I'm gonna take my crimson. This might still be a little wet. I'm gonna add in a little crimson there. She has some pinkness on her chin in this area. The nice thing that's happening is when I add that crimson on top of the ultramarine, it's turning to like a purple, which a lot of people's shadows on their faces have purple. Some have more green, and if that's the case, all you would do is put yellow ochre on top of this. Yellow ochre is a yellow, and you have ultramarine, which is a blue. That will make a greenish shadow. But this girl is more of a purpley shadow girl. But why don't I, just for sake of demonstration, I'm going to take a little bit of yellow ochre, and I'll show you what that does here on this side. It makes more of a greenish shadow. So if she needed some of that, I could just throw that on there. So what you would do once you've done the ultramarine layer, then you did the first layer of skin tone, you're just gonna keep playing back and forth with these 3 colors. So in some places you might find that you need more shadow, go in with ultramarine. Some places you find you might need more crimson, which I'm doing right now in that ear. She needs a little bit more crimson in those on top of those shadows. And then I'm gonna take a little yellow ochre. But all I'm doing is using 3 colors. I'm gonna post a video, not of me painting, but of someone else that does portraits in a different way in watercolor, more loose, I would say, because I'm definitely more of a controlled painter. So right now I'm putting crimson on this left ear. Whoops, I kind of lost my shadow, so I would go back in there and fix it. So as you can see, it's starting to build. The ultramarine really does its job to give us all the detail, our shadows, any wrinkles. If you're painting someone who has wrinkles, you would put that in ultramarine. I also did the lips in ultramarine. So what I'm doing now is I'm gonna put crimson, just pure crimson, on her lips. I use slightly darker ultramarine where she had shadows on her lips, and lighter ultramarine where there were no shadows. Okay, so this is really wet, that's why it's a little kind of, the ultramarine is kind of speckled here because it's super wet. I'm going to lift a little bit of that. Okay. Let's see. So if you were doing an animal and you're doing fur, the idea for fur is very similar to what I just did up here. You're going to use 3 values at least. You can do more. So start with a middle value. Then you're going to move to a darker value and you're going to leave the whites alone. So I'm going to pretend maybe her braid comes down here over her shoulder maybe, or maybe it's like a ponytail, side ponytail, so we can pretend this is like the ear of a dog or something. So let's say this is your middle value. I'm going to take my brush and I'm kind of sweeping it down to make some hair-like or feather-like ends here. Okay, so I'm doing that with my middle value. And while this is still wet, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to lift out some of the highlights that I kind of painted over. So I'm going to pretend that there's a highlight right here that's kind of going down at an angle. Okay, so I have some highlight, and then I'm just going to take my dark value and I'm going to start up here, and again I'm going to use the tip of my brush and create little feathery marks. I'm moving from top to bottom. That just works best for me with the way my hand works. Okay, and then maybe there's some little wispies out here that are in shadow, and then maybe this part curls under a little bit. Okay, so you can do that with, this is the brush that I'm using, size 6. You can also, if you have one, you can use a fan brush. So if you're doing something big, obviously this would not work for this small portrait, but so to use the fan brush, it has that wispy, oh, I need more water. It has that wispy effect already. So if you're doing something big, you can use one of these, or you can even cut this if you wanted to, if you didn't want to use it big again. And then one last thing that I wanted to bring up is to unify everything. So if you look at this ponytail that I just painted, it does feel kind of separate, like the parts feel separate to me. So I'm going to take a little bit of, let's see, I'll do the yellow ochre, and yeah, let's do a little bit of yellow ochre with a teeny bit of ivory black in it, and I'm just going to paint over the whole thing to kind of unify my ponytail. And then I always like to lift a little bit of highlight if I can, and that lifted a little bit, so that's good. And while we're still here, I'll do one more layer on top of the face so that you can see what layering with this method does. So I'm just using yellow ochre and crimson again. She's getting a little orangey now. I think I have too much ochre, so I'm going to add a little bit more crimson. The more layers with this method that you do, the more the blue will be neutralized by the other 2 colors. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to happen the first try. Also, another thing to keep in mind when doing this method is make sure to lift highlights, which I have not really been doing that much. So I would probably, at the end, maybe go back and scrub out. She has a highlight on her cheek right here. Oops. And then on her forehead a little bit, she has a highlight up here. Okay. So there you have it. The lighting is a little off, like I said, in my studio, but that's how you can do portraits, more detailed portraits in watercolor. And then I'm going to post another video for you guys of how you might do a more loose portrait in watercolor. All right, let me know if you have questions.